In this video, we're going to be talking about how to blend jazz and classical piano techniques on the piano. It's Paul Tobey here from Jazzmentl.com. Thank you for joining me for another one of my tutorials. This is an interesting one because if you're a classical player who wants to get better at jazz, or if you're a jazz player who wants to apply some of your jazz ideas to classical music, then this is going to be a great video for you. My perspective on this is basically understanding the chord structure of the classical music that you're turning into jazz. And this is great because it's going to help you memorize your classical pieces a little bit better, but then it's also going to help you turn those classical pieces into some great jazz improvisations. And I think it's really appropriate in this case to go with Bach because Bach was a great improviser. Now he had limited tertian harmony to work with. Current modern jazz harmonic progression includes tertian harmony, but it also takes it a bit further into upper structure notes. In other words, extensions. And Bach didn't really have that at the time. And we're going to focus on one of Bach's compositions, Goldberg Variation No. 1. I've got it up here on the screen. I started my life as a classical piano player, but haven't really played a lot of it for many years. But recently, I've been reintroduced to classical music, and I thought this would be a good tune to start with. Let me play the first 6 bars and let's hear how it sounds. Okay, that's pretty much how Bach intended it to be. What we're going to do is look at that from a jazz perspective, and I think this is really important. I think most classical players tend to focus on the notes. Now, there may be some thought about harmony, but the understanding of the harmony from a complete harmonic progression standpoint is the most important part. So what we're going to do is dissect these first 6 bars and write chord symbols for them. And then we can use those chord symbols to improvise with jazz. So if you take a look at the first bar, it's essentially one chord. Take a look at the scale. So it's all G. The scale is this. But because there's a focus on the F sharp, we might think of that like a G major 7th chord. Okay, and then the chord changes obviously in the next bar. Therefore, let's apply a G major 7 chord symbol to that first bar. And then when we get to the next bar, take a look at the bass notes because I think Bach, in terms of the way that he wrote tunes, always did a lot of bass. It's kind of like a walking bass line. So he's moving down to the F sharp. And then the chord changes on the next bar. So I think, based on the notes that are written here, this is an F sharp half diminished 7th chord or F sharp minor 7 flat 5 chord. Moving to the B7 chord before we get to E minor in the next bar. Because if you take a look at the bass note on the 3rd bar, it's basically E minor. You've got a 10th here. You see that? So it's really important to analyze the notes as they go by and write them in context of what the chord symbol is. Going from G major 7 to F sharp half diminished 7th to E minor 7 is not a typical jazz progression. But if you just threw in a B7 flat 9 chord here, it makes it a 2-5-1 of E minor 7. So this is 2 half diminished 7th to 5-7 of E minor. Okay, 2-5-1. And if you could just take a moment, reach down, hit the little thumbs up button. It really helps us here at the channel. And if you'd like to subscribe, we'd of course love to have you on this channel more often. Just hit the little bell when you subscribe and we'll notify you of all the upcoming tutorials that we're making. And then when we get to the next bar, you can see that it goes into the key of D. It's clearly D major. If you played all of those notes, you can see it's D. And then when we get to the next bar, let's take a look at that. So you've got B in the bass. To me, that's clearly B minor 7, right? If you take a look at the chord, B minor, the whole thing basically is B minor. I mean, you have to look at the notes themselves and what chord does that represent. So let's put a B minor 7 chord on there. So the next bar, to me, that looks like we're getting to C major. If you take a look at the chord, it's a major 9, right? This interval, major 9. Okay, so let's put in a C major 7th chord there. Now you can see for the most part, I'm using 7th chords. G major 7, F half diminished 7th, B7 flat 9. These are all 7th chords. And you could do that for D7 as well. So we're going to put D major 7. So to me, those are the chords that represent the first 6 bars. We could go on, but I don't want to take up too much time. I just wanted to give you the idea of how to blend jazz and classical. So then if you were to take those chord symbols and use the rhythm, which is basically 3/4 time, jazz waltz, it's more like 6/8 if you actually look at the number of eighth notes that are in the bar. So it would be 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, like that. That's kind of like the feel. So straight eighths is like this. Jazz is more like this. They're closely related, but jazz has more of an emphasis on the and of the beat. So 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2. Okay? And if you were to improvise over that, obviously you would get different notes than is written. But because you have the chord symbols, it's easier to improvise by using some of Bach's ideas, but converting that to your own by understanding the chords and the scales at the same time, like this. One of the things that I did there is I went from E minor 7 to A7 here. We forgot to do that one because if you take a look at the bass note, this is clearly an A7 chord. These are essentially the same chords that Bach would improvise over, but they would be more tertian based in terms of just triads, maybe diminished chords. So we have much more extended harmony in jazz by using 7th chords and their extensions like B7 flat 9. So this is really the way to blend the two styles. You want to change the rhythm, obviously, of jazz to be more swing related. And then if you wanted to play the classical version, you would play more straight eighths. Now, you can still improvise using straight eighths. It would sound more like this. Jazz is more like this. Now they sound very similar, but the feel is different. It's always on the and of the eighth notes. For example, if you took a look at a scale, the accent is on the and of the beat. Get the idea? And that's really how to blend the two styles. Try it sometime. If you're working with your trio, bring in a classical piece of music with all of the chord symbols written out and get the band to play it. It's really a lot of fun to do this. I hope this was helpful to you. So what I've done is I've written out a chord symbol chart for the entire Goldberg Variation number 1. You're going to find the link to that sheet music. It's absolutely free to download. I'm going to put it up here in the corner. Please go check that out. And one of the players that I think is very closely related to classical music is Bill Evans. So if you want to dive more into Bill Evans' style of playing and how it kind of approaches classical music, I suggest you check out this tutorial next.